It's spring. Yeah, right. It snowed last night. Classic Maine. March the 20th, 2014. And on this day, 10 years ago, I wrote a meditation that continues the exploration of the sage. Now, yesterday's meditation from the 19th ended with a quotation from Heidegger, who said, "Insofar as philosophy finds its way back into inceptual way of being, in the other beginning, and the question of the truth of being, B-E-ing, the question of the truth of being becomes the grounding midpoint. The abground character of philosophy reveals itself. As such, philosophy must return to the beginning in order to bring into the free space of its mindfulness the cleavage and the beyond itself, the estranging and always unfamiliar." You got to spend a lot of time with Martin Heidegger to even, I think, have an inkling of what he's going for there. But I remember in graduate school we had a course on Heidegger on, I think it was the book was Hegel's Concept of Experience, and it was taught by Christoph Ehrman, and he was a visiting professor at the GF, and he was a Hegelian. He was the partner of not Johannes Fritzsche, I don't even remember. Anyway, so, oh yeah, Victoria Husla, who was the boy genius. Yes, and so they were Hegelians, and so he taught this course, did Christoph Ehrman, on Heidegger's critique of Hegel, and the whole thing was a defense of Hegel, which was very interesting. It was one of my first semesters. It was my first semester, so one of mine. Actually, it technically was one of them because I started in the summer with the class with Agnes Heller. A couple weeks after I graduated from Fordham, I took this course with Heller. It was great. It was really great, and summer class. And then I started in the fall, so to speak, again. Not punning at all with this Heideggerian originary, call to originary thinking here, which is in this quotation. But anyway, so we went through the whole semester, and I was, what is it, wet behind the ears, or green, or something like that. Just coming out of Fordham, the new school and all its tradition and all that. I'm just getting into it, and so I listened pretty much 90% of that course. I just listened, took notes. It was great, and but at the end, Yerman wanted to debrief with the class, and he was shocked to find out that so many people in the course were unhappy with the way that the course had unfolded. And I remember the look on his face and his body language as one person after another said, we came in this course to study a Heidegger book, and you ended up making it into a defense of Hegel. And that seems, really disingenuous of you. Bad faith. And one guy in particular, I remember him, I don't remember his name, but I remember he was, there were, multi-generations in that class. This guy was probably in his 40s, so a good bit older than we were. And he said, you took out all the fun of reading Heidegger. You just killed it. Heidegger is someone I enjoy reading, he said, and I really didn't understand what he was saying. I enjoy reading Heidegger, and there's a playfulness and a fun and an excitement, and you just took that all away. And I remember Yermon's face. He just kind of got bright red, first out of embarrassment, but then of anger, and then he just kind of shot back and why philosophy wasn't a game, and it was serious, and considering the pulp, and then it just all went crazy and haywire. I didn't appreciate what was going on, really. I was just a complete spectator in that class. And I had studied a lot of Hegel. I went to the new school thinking I was either going to do something on the Frankfurt School, probably Habermas or Adorno, and or Hegel. I was really into Hegel coming out of Fordham after studying at Quentin Lauer. So I was taking the course because it was on Hegel indirectly, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't say anything, because I was just sort of neutral in the discussion myself, with an inkling towards Hegel, but I was interested in Heidegger, and made to be interested in Heidegger. Anyway, so all that to say is reading Heidegger, it is kind of fun, and it's complicated and challenging and very serious. I don't think that this guy was saying that he wasn't serious about it, but he said it's a challenge to take Heidegger seriously on his own terms. So the quotation, though, really is a great example of what I call originary thinking. It's a call to originary thinking, a call in the most fundamental sense, because it's saying that philosophy must return to the beginning in order to bring into the free space of mindfulness the cleavage and beyond itself. I mean, this beginning is, as I said yesterday, the sort of fundamental ontological situation of our relationship with being and being's presencing, which shows us freedom, if you will, or calls us to freedom, or offers us freedom. So that's where we ended yesterday, and let's pick it up today. We've said that learn/teaching is an event, a happening, an occurrence that unfolds in the twofoldness of the twofold play. The essence of this event is relatedness, but this relatedness occurs simultaneously within two dimensions. On the one hand, it occurs as the unfolding of our relationship between being and beings. On the other hand, it is the event of the relationship within the horizon of beings. This is why we have said that when this unfolding happens, human beings find themselves caught in the twofold play, which is another way of saying we find ourselves to be, even before we observe and handle beings, to be in a relationship with being. We've also emphasized while the heart of learning is the discovery of this relationship, the ever-deepening submergence into the ground of being, of our being. But breaking and penetrating deeply into this ground is also the ever-increasing breadth of our wandering with others. Thus, the breaking of the ground in our destinal return to the roots of our being is at the same time the making of paths that signify the relational rows we hoe with others. In our ground-breaking work, we cultivate friendship. Our learning is said to be both ground-breaking and path-breaking. A harvest is reaped with our poetic dialogue that unfolds in the sojourn of learning, the wandering we undertake with others in the cultivation of friendship. We build communities and community in this wandering, and the processual homeland appears in this journey. A processual homeland appears in this journey. The sage is the one whose evocative speech gets wandering underway. But the sage is also the one who initiates the breaking of the grounds and paths. As the teacher, she is both with and ahead of her apprentices who wander with her. She is ahead only in the collective memory of her wandering together. She is ahead only in that the collective memory of her wandering together situates her in a location where she, more than they, perceive the awesome breadth and depth of the matter at hand. As the teacher, the sage is ahead in that she has experienced the sublime character of the twofold relationship. The sage arrives with the memory of her wandering, having always already broken ground in many paths. Her arrival is made possible by this breaking, this destruction. So she arrives with the tidings, the gift of teachability, and as we have said, this gift is her teaching, to let learn. The sage is more teachable than her apprentices, and this means in one way that she is more capable of hearing, of standing ready to receive. She is reposed and open and ready to repose. Heidegger is worth repeating here. Quote, the teacher is ahead of his apprentices in this alone, that he still has more to learn than they. He has to let them learn. The teacher must be capable of being more teachable than the apprentices. The teacher is far less assured of his ground than those who learn are of theirs. Unquote. The apprentices in the beginning have yet to break ground and paths, so they have not yet perceived the ground as uncertain, as layered, and fallow. Because they have yet to wander, they merely commute on paved paths, upon the street and narrow tracks. The apprentices are not yet ready to learn until they have welcomed the stranger into their abode. The sage arrives as a stranger from a strange land, and as a stranger, estranges the domestic tranquility with his evocative speech, her questions which provoke. If irritation gives way to wonder, the sage has been welcomed into the abode. The questioning, the reposing by the sage is evocative precisely because the sage is perpetually wandering, which means she arrives estranged. To be the perpetual learner means she is always already in a state of questioning, and this means she arrives ready to hear others. The questioning by the sage represents the authentic desire to learn. In hearing stories, the narrative, the saying of the author who welcomes her into his home, the sage gathers. What does the sage gather? In hearing the stories, the sage gathers the seeds that will be sowed in the broken ground and reaped in the cultivation of community. The sage's wandering cultivates a philosophy of the people. Now, this is an interesting one, right? Because it's very fragmented, and reading it, I was telling my colleague, friend Gert Biesta, who asked me, what is it like to go back and read these? And I had to say that, sometimes there's a feeling of, excitement and elation. Other times, it's feelings of almost embarrassment of just how fragmented it was. Which is interesting because it shows how deeply we internalize the Academy's expectations of what counts, and this is so I'm struggling with that even today when I'm reading this. So this book's been published almost with there was editing that went on, but I didn't the dropping into this discussion of the sage while in the midst of talking about Socrates just went through. It was almost impossible to organize this book into anything like chapters. Which, this is a tradition, right? Because going back to even Plato's Republic, the Republic, it wasn't, it was organized later into 10 books, but it wasn't organized by Plato that way. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking it's really fragmented, and I'm going here and going there. But what I'm consistently doing in this particular meditation is focusing on this quotation from Heidegger. That ended the day before, yesterday, were the abground character of philosophy. So this going to the roots. And so this notion that the sage is the one who's breaking ground, going to the roots, right, and is revealing the sort of pure potentiality or presencing or being's presencing, the offering of being as freedom, human freedom, that the sage takes us to the ground, to this opening, to this break. And I know I'm anticipating, because I remember that upcoming is this discussion of the opening of the ground and this gap, and how we have to go, sort of that the language moves over this gap, and that we move over this gap. So there's going to be that coming up. But for here, the breaking of the ground, there's some interesting sentences here. The breaking and penetrating deeply into this ground. Which is the beginning. Heidegger calls it the beginning. So for me now, this has become, what I call originary thinking. Originary thinking goes to this ground, and the ground is sort of broken in the going into. This is, I think, what Heidegger's trying to say. So as we go into it, we break it, and so that it opens up, and in opening it up, it gives us, this possibility, right? So there's all this harvesting and notions of planting and harvesting and reaping and this sort of thing. So this is important, right? There's the sort of fecundity of earth, right? That's there. So the breaking of the ground is this, movement of originary thinking, and so this is very important. But it's also a movement on paths. So on the one hand, you have this sense of like the relational rows, I've said, so this idea of a farm or a garden where you break the ground in these even sort of rows and plant things. but I also sort of in the exact moment that I'm saying that, I also say it's both groundbreaking and pathbreaking. Sort of to extend this idea of, it's not just, we can't just go too much into the metaphor of breaking ground and planting things. We also have to, sort of move along the ground, right? So there's also this important human terrestrial dimension that we're wandering. So there's a sense in which, we cultivate in a sort of fixed spot, if you will, a garden or an area which we farm, and we work that particular area. We break the ground, we keep it, we nourish it with water, and we give it sort of organic matter, and we plant seeds, and we hope that they sprout, so they take root, and then we tend to that garden, and that farm. But there's another sense in which there's also this movement out, right? There's the sojourning, right? I mean, one needs to think in this way in order to sort of get the totality of the groundbreaking is also path breaking. And for Heidegger, this is the very important metaphor. And it's not just a metaphor, because he had this, this dwelling in the Black Forest, and so much of his thinking, particularly the later Heidegger, is sort of an expression of his wandering through these paths in the dark forest. And there's some great photographs of him with Hannah Arendt, actually, when she came to visit him in the Black Forest, where they're wandering through and walking through. So groundbreaking and path breaking is our key here. The last thing I want to say, because was originally trying to keep these a bit shorter so that folks could actually watch them and not feel that they were committing a lot of time. 20 minutes can be a lot of time when you're listening to someone read and then make a commentary. So I'm going to try to keep it under 20. Here, what's interesting is that it seems that I've gone from talking about Socrates and the cultivation of friendship through philosophy, or philosophy as the cultivation of friendship that leads to community. I mentioned this. I said that a harvest is reaped with the wandering we undertake with others in the cultivation of friendship. So this idea that cultivation is what we're cultivating is community, right, through friendship. And as we move and break ground, we're making paths as we walk along, and the making of the paths is the making of friendship, and then the making of community. But as I've been saying all along, what I don't attend to in this meditation, and what clearly was something that I hadn't been sort of tuned into, was the sense in which the sage, and I emphasize this, the sage is ahead, right, ahead of the apprentices. So this problem of equality and singularity, right? And so on the one hand, you have friendship being this powerful equalizing force, but it's also an event where everyone is sort of held out in their singularity and their uniqueness. I mean, this is the most robust sense of community that we gather from Arendt. It's that we exist in plurality, and it's the coming together of that plurality that makes community, right? So that it's in a space where all can be seen and see, and hear and be heard, that the plurality forms a community, right? So what is this sage business? Again, what is this sense of someone being sort of apart from, almost above, if you will? So this the community, right? Well, I mean, there's a sense in which the sage, the teacher, getting back to education, the teacher is the one who not only is ahead but hangs around, so to speak, right? And this is kind of like getting back to the reality of teaching. I mean, this is, believe it or not, grounded in experience. After all, it's a phenomenology, So I guess what I'm suggesting here is that, in my own experience and the experience of my colleagues and people in the profession, we stay around. I've been at Hofstra now for 18 years teaching the course in philosophy of education. I've hung around. I mean, my first students that I had at the graduate level, who were in their 20s, I mean, they're folks that have probably had jobs and had families, and their kids are not grown up like my girls are. And not only that, but the students I had, I mean, they were 18 years ago. These folks are 36 years old. Again, they've they've gone on and they've lived life. But I've remained, and I'm still working with 18 and 19 years old. So there's a sense in which, as I grow, with experience, and sort of, time, there's a certain sense of, this is the wisdom of the ages, right? And yet, teaching the courses now in 2014, it feels as like I was teaching them in 1993. I mean, I still feel that sense of newness and of freshness, and so they aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, the true experience of doing this kind of learning in the ontological sense, one feels the same, insofar as it's always new and it's always in the moment and it's always a moment of a feeling of spontaneity and improvisation. Even though one is going back and playing the same song, so to speak, and returning to the same material. But having said that, as I move on, it remains fresh and new, and there's still improvisation and excitement. At the same time, I have been doing this for now, 20 going on 21 years, teaching philosophy at the college level as a full-time faculty member, and that's a lot of time to have been doing this. So, I don't call myself a sage in the sense of, of attaining some special status in the Taoist tradition, but it's the sense in which, with Heidegger, I'm ahead, right, of my students, both in terms of having done this before, but also, and this is what's interesting in Heidegger, and still needing to learn more and more. So there's this interesting play between the sense of experience, having placed one ahead in time, but also making it more complicated in many ways, because then one needs to unlearn all of those 21 years, so to speak, of what one has done in order to stay in that moment where things are new and fresh. And so hopefully that last move made sense. So I'm going to leave it at that on this first day of spring 2014. March the 20th, rereading and commenting on a meditation that was originally written March 20th, 2004.